Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome to Lion's Heart. In this video, I'm going to go over the two major components of consciousness growth, which are ego dissolution and ego development. So if you've been doing this work, you've been working on your consciousness, you've been meditating, maybe doing psychedelics, reading the books, everything like that, you've probably noticed that there's almost like two sections of this growth. So one is kind of work on your ego. One is like traumas, patterning, relationship work, finances, money, these kinds of things, like being a human in the world, right? This is like more work on your ego, childhood trauma, etc., therapy. And then there's like the metaphysical kind of like Rupert Spira kind of Eckhart Tolle work, where it's like, who am I? I'm not this ego, I'm not this body, etc. I'm nothingness, development in that sense, where you're kind of more dissolving that person. And what's important to touch on is that these are both extremely important and essential parts of growth. And I find that what happens is actually there's much, usually with each teacher or each path, there's too much emphasis on one or the other. So like in the West, in psychology, kind of like if you're working with like Aubrey Marcus kind of stuff, it's more about like you as a human. It's more like your ego, your development, your traumas, your patterning, you expressing yourself authentically. And then if you're working more with like Eckhart Tolle or Rupert Spira or these kind of like enlightenment teachers, it's much more about, this vertical path of like, I'm none of this, I'm not the ego, I'm not the body, who am I, etc. I'm the awareness that's holding it all. So it's very important to kind of touch on both of these points, right? So it's important to take advantage of the fact that we can share these ideas with experts from both fields. So we can go into the horizontal, the ego development, and get the best of the best, IFS, internal family systems, etc., and really work on the aspects of ego development that we need to touch on or work on. And at the same time, we can also go to the best of the ego dissolution work, and we can find the best, like enlightenment teachers and coaches and things like that, the best practices and techniques for dissolving the ego. So let's touch on the horizontal part first. So first we have to acknowledge the idea that even developing and growing yourself as a person is a very new discovery. It's only in the past couple hundred years that psychology has even started, with William Wundt beginning it in 1897. So that's less than 200 years ago. On the time span of human existence, this is less than a blip. And we have to grasp the fact that in the old times, there wasn't this idea of improving yourself. There was much more social constructs that were just, it's like just admitted, and this is unshakable truth. You're born to be a blacksmith. You're born to be a knight. This is your role in life. You've developed your traumas, but there wasn't this idea of healing your traumas. It's more or less just like, this is how you are, and you're stuck with it. And we have no ways of improving it or knowing what to do about it or changing it, and transformation was definitely not a thing. So it was much more about survival rather than improvement. And, things like dating wasn't really a thing either. You just kind of ended up with someone based on your family status, and that was it. And she was fully dependent on you, and you were going to impregnate her. And, habits, discipline, health, these were all luxuries. These are all luxuries of this time we're in now. This is all luxuries of the new century, right? Like these things were not, even jogging is a new invention. Forget dating, forget pickup, good habits. People didn't even really know what was good food. But in their defense, back then the food was actually much more healthy, so they didn't need to like stay away from junk food and sugar and these kind of things, because then it wasn't as much of a problem. But nonetheless, like these things, health, discipline, increasing your financial status are pretty much new in the grand scheme of human growth, right? And so we're still in the ego development. This is all ego development. This is all 3D material world things. that you as a human can grow and do. So this is development, horizontal. So this brings us to the horizontal side of consciousness growth. And if you live in the West, the US, Europe, Canada, etc., this is much more familiar. And this is basically everything we're taught that matters in life, and where most of the Western energy, focus, and time goes into improving. So horizontal growth is the growth of you as a person, as a literal human being, your psychology, and how you show up in life. What's your job? What's your personality like? Are you likable? Are you charismatic? How much trauma do you have? How's your emotional state? Are you effective and efficient? Are you confident? What's your traumas? What's your emotions? What's your level of development? What are your values, character? What's your way of being? Your habits, lifestyle, career, possessions, income, dating life, friends, family, social life, leisure. It's everything that you as a separate individual, that human there that's sitting there listening to this, that's got a name and a story and a background, what that name is, right? Who that person is in a social context. So some examples of growth in this area are more focused on things like what's your life purpose, psychotherapy work, trauma work, shadow work, dating improvement, sometimes psychedelic medicines, which work more on you as a person, emotional release and mastery, financial success and security. And another good example is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That's a great way to look at the horizontal frame, like status, sex, food, social standing, respect, etc. And socializing skills as well goes under horizontal. And this is a very, very important factor for your overall growth, because if you don't put time and effort into the horizontal side, it can cause a lot of dysfunctions, and spirituality can actually be used as a tool to avoid doing the work on your ego and these emotions and finances and things that need to be handled in life. And a lot of people can just say, oh, that's just ego, that's just material world, it's all an illusion, I don't need to focus on that. But that actually is very damaging, and it's actually damaging to your vertical growth as well, because the ego needs to feel safe and grounded to grow, and the ego needs to feel safe and grounded to ultimately dissolve and let go of itself. If you can't fucking find a way to eat food, how are you gonna become enlightened if you can't take care? How is your ego gonna feel secure enough to let go of itself and dissolve and trust reality when you can't even barely get a meal on the table, or get a date, or make some money, or work on some of your traumas and things like this, And it can also leave you very spiritually developed, but without a solid financial situation, without the ability to date, you're kind of just, doing ego dissolve work, but you're very unbalanced on the horizontal side. So as you can see, and as you can reflect, this is what the West is all about. Western world is all about improving your situation in life, getting more, being more attractive, bodily success like exercise and weightlifting, high value on looks and achievement, money, status, etc. This is what the West, we're all about. This is pretty much what we put all of our energy into. So you can grow horizontally through things like therapy, discipline, study, work, socializing, diet, fitness, family, status, eliminating toxic beliefs and habits, and working on yourself as a person. This is what most self-improvement material is aimed at working on, and most Western solutions come to this. As mentioned before, it's really important not to ignore this. Many people think the consciousness work or spiritual work is just this linear thing where you're becoming awareness, and as you do it more and more, it just goes up and up, and you're holistically healing yourself. But there are things you can be completely missing that your meditation practice does not address, like limiting beliefs, trauma, financial instability, sexuality. And it's very important to work on these separately from just doing your ego work. There's actually a lot of enlightened masters who are, they're still stuck in a lot of their vertical growth is extremely strong and powerful. They're very, enlightened and disillusioned, etc. But they as far as like their beliefs and things like that, they might still have like racist tendencies or sexual dysfunctions, and they're not really grown in the horizontal space. So it's important not to fall into this trap of thinking like spiritual awakening will magically cure all our problems in interacting with people and money and being happy and healed and emotionally free. There's actually a lot of work that we have to do on the ego as well, which just enlightenment, it's not likely to fix. So we kind of have to crush this naive belief, that just meditating will fix all my problems. Yeah. This is because, like the survival chains are very strong, and just some books in meditation are not going to co-opt your survival mechanisms as an animal, as a being, and the ways that you've picked up of interacting with the world and yourself, and ways of feeling and ways of being and things like this. It's just you have to really look at it in a realistic manner, that you're an animal surviving and you have these deep subconscious tendencies that are very powerful, and it's not like that's just gonna change overnight, even with years of meditation. There was a Zen woman who once said, "I spent 30 years meditating in the Himalayas. I thought I was enlightened until I returned to New York City and realized I was the same exact judgmental bitch who left." And this explains it perfectly. And there's also many accounts of spiritual teachers who have a massively advanced state of consciousness or awakening, but they, as an actual human, like I said earlier, are still, racist, homophobic, etc. And yeah, that's basically just the brief overview of the horizontal growth. But that's what the key here is, to remember that it's mostly about your psychological development and growth as a human being, your habits, trauma, personality, etc., how you show up, and who you are as a human, right? So that's horizontal. Next, we'll move on to vertical. Vertical is ego dissolution, right? So it's probably what most people who are into spirituality and meditation and these things are focused on. It's what they're really kind of like looking at or practicing or doing. And this is the dissolution of the separate individual self into our beingness. Other words for this are things like God consciousness, Brahman, awakening, self-realization, and enlightenment. The main component here is the realization that the separate self is actually illusory and never existed. The nature of this realization has been argued about, but what I can conclude is that it's more like an on-off switch. You either got it or you don't, but until you get it, you can get closer to it. So as you get closer to the switch, you'll experience less ego and more connection to reality. And then there is this point that the switch flips and you're awake, you're enlightened. You're no longer identified with the ego. And I know that sounds confusing, but try to hear me out on this. Is like you can dissolve your ego more and more as you continue on this path. And it gets less and less rigid, tense, contracted, and controlling. And you begin to taste God realization and a feeling of connection with reality and love and everything in it. And there's a feeling like you're this headless entity, right? This headless awareness, this headless space, and everything is inside of you. You're kind of like this nothingness, this witness behind the screen of reality, or the film or the play unfolding, and you're kind of just this kind of detached, free emptiness behind it all, this nothingness. So that there's like no individual behind the eyes, and that you are not inside of reality, but reality is inside of you. And it's almost like everything is happening to an empty screen of which nothingness is behind. There's no controller, and it's all just unfolding and happening, and you are quite literally nothingness. You're none of it, but you're also all of it. The notion of subject and object disappears, and there's no longer a person here experiencing what is over there, but it is all just this ever-changing flow of being. This is enlightenment. This is the goal of many meditative practices, and this is what a lot of teachers are talking about in the more vertical space. So it is ultimately a switch that's either on and off, but also the depth of that switch matters. There's people that are very deep into that on-off, and it's not just a one thing. There's many facets to it, but that's kind of another topic. And until that switch is turned on, you can get closer and closer to it. So you can dissolve the ego more and more and more. The ego can be less and less contracted and rigid. But it does happen spontaneously and without will once the fruit is right. So you can ripen yourself as a fruit, but in the end, you really don't have control over whether enlightenment happens or not, whether you fully dissolve or not. But you can get closer and closer to it. I like the analogy of standing on top of a building with a metal rod during a lightning storm is much higher likelihood that you'll get struck with lightning versus just walking on the street. And that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to increase the likelihood that we'll have this, boom awakening. But there's still tons of value in working towards it willingly and consciously, and working on surrender and self-inquiry and asking who am I in these things as well. So the highlight and focus here is on your inner state, right? How you feel in connection to reality and God being, how transcendent your ego is, like how able you are to let go and kind of just be in that awareness and that nothingness and turn off your sense of separate self. How loving are you to others? How little separate do you feel from reality? And this is much more the spiritual sides of things, right? The vertical side is where you get things like love and compassion and more meaning and meditative states and mystical states and these kinds of things. So yoga, the vertical side is more like yoga, meditation, psychedelics like 5-MeO-DMT that more move you towards God. And it's not really a focus on traumas or, like life work, life purpose, or finances. And in these states, you actually don't care about any of that. It seems like a game. It seems silly. This can be peaked at by mystical states, awakenings, and peak stakes. But to hold it down is a whole nother story. That takes years and years of meditation and yoga and things like that. And psychedelics can help you to peak the non-dual states. But ultimately, what you have to do is really bring your ego into that state naturally through working on it and practicing yoga, meditation, etc. So this takes much more work. It's more like a contemplative, meditative work where you are dissolving the ego, and it can't. The thing that's key here is it can't be reached just by working on your traumas. You need to move to a more metaphysical understanding and contemplating of reality in a much more deeper sense. So you can't get to full vertical dissolution just by doing the Western path of horizontal ego development. There's people that are very developed. They're very much have worked in their psychology. They're very healed. They're very emotionally free. They've got their finances, their dating life. They've basically crushed life in all senses, but they know nothing about spirituality. They don't believe in it. They think it's silly. They have no vertical development. They have no connection to God or transcendence of the ego. They still take their ego very seriously. They think it's the real thing, and they think it's the only thing in life. And this is actually a hindrance, because once you develop enough, there's really, you can keep developing and developing, but there's a point where it's like, you got to start kind of becoming more transcendent and spiritual in a sense, or your development kind of just stops and it ends up becoming more of a barrier than it is a catalyst for growth, right? The ego, you can develop it and develop it, but it's still going to always be an ego. And in the end, it needs to, in the very least, be seen as an illusion and not real. And as long as you're taking the ego seriously, you're kind of stuck in a sense. So this happens in a lot of Western people, and so they're like, I'm working on myself, but I'm still not feeling much more happy or free or whatever. And this is the reason for that, is that they're not doing the vertical work of ego dissolution. So in conclusion, I need to make the caveat that the two do feed into each other. So if you do spend a lot of time meditating, you will have spillover into, the horizontal side, how you interact with people, freedom from trauma, emotions, connection to life, and vice versa. But you might not call it spirituality. But at the same time, it won't do everything. There is a spillover, but it's not, these two are still, you got to think of them as completely separate things, right? There's a little spillover, but it's not enough for one to overwhelm the other. And you can think of ego development as more like the 3D tangible world, the world you can see and measure, and ego dissolution as more subjective and metaphysical, so more of like a nothingness, a void, or an empty space. And it's absolutely vital that these two things are grown and integrated together. So I've personally seen so many people who are advanced and awakened spiritually, but they have massive character flaws and insecurities in their ego and dealing with people. And they just come back to that way of ego, even though they can access these deep states. They're still kind of like in the 3D world, they're still very much like undeveloped and childish and immature and toxic in a lot of ways. And we have to remember that awakening does not magically fix everything and make you powerful, intelligent, smart, loving person. I mean, it can help with that, but it doesn't do everything. We still have to work on how we're showing up in the world and how we're dealing with people and these things through our ego, using the ego as a tool. Not the truth, but a tool. The ego is a tool. So we're both in the world, but we're not of it. And that's the main point of this video, is consider that whatever this is, this reality, this life, this world, it's not stupid, and there's likely a very valid reason for why you are in this human body, in this human form. So we don't want to spiritually bypass it and demonize the ego and the human side of things, but to befriend the ego and grow it with love, to be a functional, effective, and confident person. At the same time, not just getting lost in the gross material world and all of its allure, but to remember that this is an illusory, and ultimately it doesn't matter what you do here. All is held in love, and there is no wrong steps. So you can look at it like Maslow's hierarchy of needs is the horizontal side, and then behind the triangle there is just this infinite space of love and awareness that you can either be aware of or not, whether it's turned on or not, right? So you can climb the triangle and be aware of the awareness around it, or you can just be aware of the awareness around it, but not give attention to the triangle, which would be like spiritual bypassing. Or you can just be doing the triangle, but not aware of the spiritual awareness and the love around it, and then you're kind of like the opposite of spiritual bypassing. You're just working on the horizontal. So the question is, do you want a triangle, or do you want a triangle that you know is illusory and floating in infinite loving awareness? That's it for today. I hope this made sense. Please like the video, write down some comments. Would love to hear what you guys think. With gratitude and love, namaste.